She never raised her voice. She never made a threat. She never did anything you could point to and say that right there, that was the moment she took control. She simply went quiet, slightly cooler, a degree less warm than she was yesterday, for reasons she didn't explain and you didn't ask about directly because asking directly felt like the wrong move, felt like it would make things worse, felt like it would confirm some failure you couldn't yet name. So instead you adjusted. You softened your tone. You became more attentive, more available, more careful with your words. You started monitoring her energy before you walked into a room. You started managing your own behavior around the forecast of her mood. And you called it being a good partner. What you didn't realize, what almost no one tells men clearly, is that the monitoring, the adjusting, the constant recalibration of yourself around her emotional temperature, that was the response she was generating. Not through a plan she sat down and designed. Through something older and more automatic than planning. Something that operated without her full awareness, producing results she may not have consciously intended but accepted completely. You were being controlled without a hand being laid on you, without a word being raised against you, without a single visible move. The most effective manipulation leaves no evidence. It just leaves a man who no longer resembles himself. Picture a man trying to remember, somewhere around the 8th month of a relationship, when he stopped having opinions that didn't first pass through an internal filter of how she might receive them. He can't locate the moment. It didn't happen in a moment. It happened in the slow, accumulated weight of 100 small adjustments, each one reasonable, each one caring, each one quietly teaching him that her emotional state was his responsibility to manage. This video is going to name exactly what happened, and precisely why it works so well on the men who care the most. What follows will be uncomfortable to recognize. That discomfort is the point. You are not imagining it. That is the first thing to establish. The confusion you feel, the sense that you are constantly one wrong word away from something going cold, that you are always slightly on trial for something that was never formally charged, that no amount of effort quite produces the stable warmth you're working toward, that confusion is not a sign that you are too sensitive or too demanding or failing to communicate properly. It is a sign that you are operating inside a dynamic that is designed to make you feel exactly that way. The pattern is specific. She withdraws, not dramatically, not in a way that requires explanation. A slight drop in warmth, a shorter response, the particular quality of presence that is technically there but emotionally absent. He feels the shift. His nervous system registers the cold before his conscious mind names it. And then, because he is a man who cares, because he has invested, because the warmth mattered and its absence therefore matters, he moves toward it. He reaches. He asks if everything is okay. He reviews the last 24 hours for something he might have done. He becomes warmer, more attentive, more careful. He reorganizes his behavior around restoring what was there before. And she, consciously or not, notes the correlation. Her withdrawal produced his movement. Her coldness generated his effort. Her silence brought him closer. A man sits at a dinner table he set, across from a woman who has been 3 degrees colder than normal for 40 minutes. He doesn't know why. He has asked twice softly and received non-answers. He is now managing the conversation with the care of a man walking across uncertain ground, choosing lighter topics, avoiding anything that might add to whatever weight is already present, performing warmth to compensate for the warmth he is not receiving. He is working. She is not. That asymmetry is the mechanism. The brutal contrast. He believes his effort is relationship maintenance. What it is actually doing is confirming each time that the withdrawal works, that her emotional climate governs his behavior, that she holds the thermostat. Understanding how that dynamic became installed requires going beneath the behavior. The mechanism is not new. It predates every relationship either of you has ever been in. Call it intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological principle that makes gambling compulsive, that keeps people checking phones that rarely deliver what they hope for, that creates the most durable behavioral patterns in human psychology. The principle is simple. Unpredictable rewards produce stronger behavioral conditioning than consistent ones. When warmth arrives on a schedule, the nervous system adapts and stops responding intensely to it. When warmth arrives unpredictably, sometimes present, sometimes withdrawn without clear reason, the nervous system never adapts. It stays activated. It stays seeking. In the context of a relationship, this means that a woman who alternates warmth and coldness without explanation does not produce a man who eventually gives up. She produces a man who becomes more attached, more focused on her, more organized around the project of understanding and restoring her approval. Not through cruelty, often without any conscious design at all. But the effect is the same regardless of intent. Here is the second layer. The withdrawal activates a specific fear that most men who care deeply carry without naming it. The fear that they are failing her. That something they did or didn't do or are or aren't is the source of her withdrawal. This fear does not produce clarity. Produces anxious compliance. The man stops asking himself what he actually wants from the interaction and starts asking only what he needs to do to make the coldness stop. At that moment, the moment his own desires become secondary to managing her emotional state, he has lost the frame entirely. Once a man's peace of mind becomes contingent on her mood, she doesn't need to do anything else. The control is already complete. Contrast this with a man who registers her withdrawal and does not reorganize himself around it. He notices the coldness. He does not find it acceptable. He does not pretend it isn't happening. But he also does not chase it, does not soften, reach, explain, or perform. He remains himself, present, grounded, unhurried. Picture her watching that man from across the room. She expected movement. She expected the familiar pattern of his reaching. His stillness is disorienting in a way she cannot immediately process. What she does with that disorientation, and what it reveals about the dynamic, is what makes the next section necessary. It is never loud. That is what makes it so difficult to name while you're inside it. It shows up as a text message that arrives 4 hours later than it should, for no stated reason. He's been checking his phone. He noticed the gap. When the message finally arrives, there's something slightly flat in its tone. Not hostile, just absent. He crafts his response with more care than usual, trying to restore the warmth, trying to ensure nothing in his words creates further distance. He rereads it before sending. He is editing himself around her. It shows up as the Sunday evening that arrives with an atmosphere he can feel the moment he walks through the door. Nothing has been said. Nothing will be said for a while. She is present, making dinner or scrolling or doing something ordinary, but there is a quality to the room that has changed. He begins reading for causes. Was it something from last night? Something he said this morning? Something unrelated to him entirely that he is now preemptively absorbing as his fault? He won't ask directly. Asking directly felt like an accusation last time, and the conversation that followed cost 3 days of recovery. So he moves carefully. He becomes helpful, warm, slightly more attentive than normal. He manages the atmosphere with the practiced precision of a man who has learned that his peace of mind depends on getting this right. It shows up in conflict resolution with a specific signature. She raises an issue. He responds, not in a way she wanted. She withdraws, not ending the conversation, just cooling it. He senses the withdrawal and walks back what he said. Not because he changed his mind, because the temperature dropped and he could not hold his position against the cold. The reframe that changes everything. He didn't change his position because she was right. He changed it because her withdrawal was unbearable and he has never built the capacity to sit in it without reaching. That inability, the incapacity to hold his own ground in the presence of her emotional withdrawal, is not a character flaw. It is a trained response. It was trained through precisely this dynamic, repeated enough times that his nervous system stopped questioning it. The deeper truth operating beneath all of this is the part most men actively avoid seeing, because seeing it requires confronting something about themselves, not just about her. Here is the truth that requires the most honesty to receive. Silent manipulation, the kind described in this video, does not work on every man equally. It works most completely on the man whose sense of worth inside the relationship is conditional. The man who needs her warmth to feel secure. The man whose confidence in the relationship and, underneath that, confidence in himself, requires ongoing external confirmation to remain intact. The withdrawal hits that man precisely because it removes the confirmation he depends on. And the moment the confirmation is removed, the fear activates. Not the surface fear, not is she okay, but the deeper one, am I enough? That fear is what produces the chasing, the apologizing, the endless recalibration, not her manipulation, his unresolved relationship with his own worth. This is the line that will generate debate, but it stands. The manipulation works because he gives it the only thing it needs to function, a man who doesn't fully own his own value. She did not create that dependency. She found it. And whether she exploited it consciously or simply stumbled into the pattern, the effect is the same. His unresolved need for her approval became the mechanism through which she, or the dynamic between them, controlled the relationship's emotional climate without ever being named as controlling it. Picture a man who has been in this dynamic for 2 years. He describes his relationship as emotionally exhausting. He says he never knows where he stands. He says he tries everything and nothing is ever quite enough. He has spent 2 years inside a cycle he cannot see from the inside because he is so focused on managing her that he has stopped examining himself. He is not the victim of an unusually manipulative woman. He is a man who has never built the interior stability that would make the withdrawal ineffective. And until he builds it, any relationship he enters will produce a version of this same dynamic. The withdrawal only works if you're already standing in the wrong place, in a position where her warmth is the load-bearing wall of your stability. The correction is not to become cold. It is not to become indifferent or to withhold. It is to build, genuinely, an interior life stable enough that her warmth is something you appreciate rather than something you require. A stability that doesn't collapse when the temperature drops. A sense of worth that doesn't need constant external maintenance to remain intact. That building is the hardest work a man in this position can do. And it starts with a shift that most men resist, because making it means accepting something uncomfortable about where they actually are. The shift is not about becoming harder to affect. It is about becoming harder to destabilize. Those are different things. A man who is hard to affect has built walls. He has become defended, guarded, emotionally unavailable in the name of not being controlled. That is not the shift. That is a different cage. A man who is hard to destabilize has built a floor. A real one, from purpose, from standards, from the daily practice of being someone whose sense of worth does not live in another person's emotional temperature. He can be moved. He can feel her warmth and appreciate it genuinely. He can feel the coldness and not enjoy it. The difference is that neither one governs him. His floor holds regardless of which direction her temperature moves. When that floor is present, the dynamic changes structurally. Her withdrawal still happens, but it no longer produces the effect it was designed to produce. He notices it. He doesn't chase it. He remains himself. And in remaining himself, he removes the one ingredient the manipulation required to function. A man with a real floor cannot be controlled through the ceiling, because his stability was never stored there to begin with. Contrast this with the man without a floor, whose confidence requires her warmth to maintain its level, who rises when she is generous and drops when she withdraws, who has essentially outsourced his internal stability to her emotional output. That man is not in a relationship. He is in a dependency. And dependencies of that kind attract the dynamic described in this video the way an open signal attracts a response. If this is reaching something real, if you are recognizing the shape of your own experience in what's being described, sit with that recognition rather than moving past it quickly. Because what follows is the part that requires the most from you. The warning is not about her. It is about what happens to a man who stays in this dynamic without correcting his position. The longer he operates inside a pattern where her emotional withdrawal governs his behavior, the more completely he loses access to his own internal compass. He stops trusting his own judgment because his judgment keeps being overridden by her temperature. He stops holding positions because holding positions has been trained out of him through the consistent experience of those positions costing him warmth. He becomes, gradually and then completely, a man who runs his decisions through her emotional forecast before he makes them. That is not a relationship. That is the dismantling of a person. A man who has been inside this dynamic for years doesn't look broken. He looks accommodating. He looks reasonable. He looks like a man who has learned how to keep the peace. What he has actually learned is how to keep himself small enough that the peace is possible. The cost of accommodation is not paid in one moment. It is paid in the cumulative loss of every opinion you stopped finishing, every position you stopped holding, every version of yourself you quietly retired to keep the temperature stable. Picture a man at 50 who cannot remember the last time he said what he actually thought inside his relationship without first calculating the atmospheric consequence. He has become expert at navigating the dynamic. He never understood that navigating a dynamic that should not exist is not skill. It is surrender with good posture. What becomes possible when a man rebuilds his floor, names the pattern, and stops being the fuel the dynamic runs on, is not a guarantee that the relationship survives. Some dynamics are too established to reverse. Some patterns have been running too long for both people to step out of them intact. But what becomes possible for the man himself is the recovery of something that was never supposed to be negotiable. His own unmediated sense of who he is. And the final section is about exactly what that recovery costs and what it returns. This is the full picture, assembled without softening. Silent manipulation, emotional withdrawal, strategic coldness, the weaponized withholding of warmth, does not work through force. It works through access. It requires a specific entry point. A man whose peace of mind lives in her approval, whose stability requires her warmth to function, whose sense of self inside the relationship is stored in her emotional output rather than in his own interior. Remove that access point, build a floor that doesn't depend on her ceiling, and the dynamic loses its mechanism. Not because she becomes different, because you become different, because your stability is no longer available to be controlled through its withdrawal. That is the correction. Not coldness, not distance, not the performance of indifference. The genuine, structural, built from the inside stability of a man who knows his own worth and does not need it confirmed daily to remain certain of it. The manipulation survives only as long as the man it targets remains a man who needs it to stop. This is the kind of clarity that changes how you move through relationships, not just the current one, but every one that follows. Because the man who understands this mechanism and builds the interior response it requires enters every relationship differently. He brings something that cannot be leveraged, a self that is genuinely his own. If this channel is delivering something you haven't found in the noise, psychological precision without comfort, honesty without rage, subscribe. This is what this channel exists for, and there is more of this coming. If there is a man in your life who is currently inside the pattern described in this video, who is exhausted, confused, shrinking himself and calling it love, share this with him. He may not be ready to receive it. Share it anyway. Leave a comment with this. What was the specific moment you realized your peace of mind had stopped being your own, and what did recognizing that cost you? Because that moment of recognition is the beginning of every correction that actually holds. The most dangerous thing she ever did to you required nothing but your silence. And yours.